blessing to be here. I left the bench and then went into the ivory tower at University of Florida and Western Cooley Law School and read a Supreme Court case one day that talked about, we're going to change the way we look at family, and we're going to change the way, we look at marriage. And in fact, we, the Supreme Court, know better, so we're going to actually redefine it and change the meaning of that for you. I read that case, though, as a constitutional lawyer, and saw that that case was so much bigger than same-sex marriage. It really was about how we are going to govern our nation for the next century. And so my wife and I discussed it. 6 weeks later, we had made ourselves debt-free, and I left the world of financial security and full-time missionary to the culture now at Salt Lake Global, where we season the public dialogue with truth. And that's what I want to do for the next little bit that I have here with you, because I see we have in our audience, for example, young people from Michigan State University. They put on a spectacular debate a couple of days ago of the gubernatorial candidate, packed the room on a night where there was practically a blizzard outside. And there was more policy discussed that night than I'd seen at a debate in a long, long time. And so what I want to do for these guys is equip them to engage the culture as well, but I want you all to know that you stand on the shoulders of giants like Norm. And folks that have come before you and have paid very, very large costs sometimes for standing for truth and for standing for what is right and helping others to be able to engage the culture. And so I challenge you guys, you men, young men and women, as you engage the culture, to know that we can change the course of this nation. People have done it before, and we can do it again. And that's what's actually happening at the Supreme Court. We've got a branch of government here that's supposed to work for us. They're politically accountable to us. They do a job interview with us every 2 years in the House and every 6 years in the Senate, every 4 years over in the White House. And then we got some folks over here, because we want to give them the proper amount of independence in our Constitution to decide disputes without being impacted by politics, we give them life tenure. Well, what do? They say, you know what? Thanks for that life tenure thing. We're going to start now doing your job as well, because, it's pretty hard to get rid of us. And so, one of the things we're going to talk about is the current status of that situation where these folks are appointed for life, but yet have taken it upon themselves to change the meaning of the Constitution. Now, we can debate whether or not we should have an Article 5 convention, and I thought there was a spectacular speech earlier this morning. But the bottom line is Article 5 provides the process if you're going to change the meaning of the Constitution. And I've got some real concerns with, the con. But what I've got even bigger concerns with is an unelected branch of government doing the same thing. Changing the meaning of the Constitution, amending the meaning of the Constitution to add new rights to the Constitution. For example, the right of personal autonomy and identity. I read the Constitution. I've been reading it since I was younger than you guys. And I read the First Amendment. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, freedom of speech, and all my right to petition the government. And I look at my Second Amendment right to protect myself and my family with firearms, and I would go on. I read the Fourth Amendment, and it protects us from government and search and seizures, and the Fifth Amendment, the right to due process. Well, and I kept going and going and going, expecting when I was in college I was going to see this right of personal autonomy, and it wasn't in there. But I was assured that it's a constitutional right. Well, how did it get there? Well, you got a few judges, lawyers wearing robes with ink in their pen, and they really truly believe they know better than we, the people, do, and they don't want us to use the Article 5 Convention to change it. So under the guise of judicial interpretation, they say, well, I found this word liberty, and I think I'm going to change the meaning of that to, it must be personal liberty, it must be personal autonomy, and it must mean the right to kill an unborn son or daughter. It must give a physician the right to kill an unborn son or daughter. It just must do that. Because doctors must have this right to be able to do that. In fact, it must even give a physician the right to kill somebody's unborn son or daughter, even during childbirth. I don't know if you know that, but in the Supreme Court, actually, after they did Roe versus Wade, they then had a government action that was designed to protect unborn human life as it was being born. The court struck it down. Said, we've got this new constitutional right of personal autonomy. The doctor has the right to kill that baby. Where'd that come from? If you ask anybody on the left or anybody on the right, who would you prefer in your constitutional governance to be making policy that is so profound that it decides whether or not human life can be taken or not? Who do you want to make that policy? Somebody that works for you that you can hold a job interview and evaluate that policy 2 years from now? Or do you want to give that to somebody who, can't be removed from office very easily and certainly has no political accountability to the people? Well, if you even ask the farthest left person that question, they're going to say, well, I want somebody that's politically accountable to me to be making policy for the United States of America or for the state of Michigan, or for that matter, Ingham County, Michigan, where we're sitting right now. As soon as they say that, well, so then you don't really support the power of the court to create this right of abortion for doctors to be able to kill unborn sons and daughters, and the right of same-sex marriage, and the right to engage in all kinds of sexual. Oh, yeah, no, I want that. But you see what we've just done? We've just changed the issue from that hot-button social policy discussion into a discussion about good governance under the rule of law and who should be making the policy. And so let me challenge each of you in here to think wisely. The good book says we're supposed to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And many times we can win the argument on the policy issue of good governance. Very often, though, I'm not saying we should sacrifice principles. I'm not even suggesting for a moment that we shouldn't be afraid to stand up and talk, because I think that's one of our larger problems, is that we whisper too much when the issue becomes a sensitive issue, or one that may cause us some consternation because we're going to get pushback from our professor or from somebody from the left at our work, or even our boss. The bottom line is, who should make these policies? And this is another talk, but I want to make sure that we don't forget about this, because there's another, branch of government that's not represented up here right now. And let me just picture it, because it's not in the Constitution. I'll just give you a blank sheet here so you can see this. It's the administrative state. It's the other folks, very often in here. Sometimes they're independent agencies, sometimes they're, executive agencies. But likewise, they don't have to face you for a job interview every couple of years. They have no political accountability at all, but yet they are making policy in this nation that is infecting you no matter what walk of life and what kind of job you have. And quite frankly, we need to hold some of the Republican members as well as the Democratic members of Congress accountable for that. Because let me tell you why they like that and why they let that happen. What they will tell you is the United States has gotten to be too big a country, too big an enterprise for us to be able at Congress to run it. And so, even though Article 1 of the Constitution says all legislative power is here, what we've now got in this nation, because a Supreme Court has authorized it over here, we've now got Congress giving the ability to delegate rulemaking and lawmaking power to somebody that you don't have to elect, or that they don't have to face in an election. And let me tell you why Congress likes that. Congress likes that because when you all get pissed off because all of a sudden impacting your religious freedom, or it's impacting your pocketbook, your paycheck, and you go and you complain to your member of Congress, what do they do? They throw up your hand. I'm sorry, I can't do anything about that. That was the executive agency that did that law. Kind of convenient, isn't it? And you wonder why we had such a colossal movement in the electorate during the last election. It's because people like you are sharing the words in this document with other people, and we're actually reading the Constitution. We're understanding in this nation for the first time in many years just exactly how our government is supposed to work, and then we lay it next to how it's actually working, and we see a Supreme Court that is literally out of control. I don't want to say out of control. Let me be a little firmer and say that it's acting like an imperial judiciary. It is acting like it doesn't have to face an election, but it can impose policy decisions and enforce policy decisions on we the people, and then not have to face any political consequences for doing so.
We call that a dictatorship?
A lot of places, at least when I was in, taking some political science classes, they would call it a dictatorship. Well, how did we get here? And for those of you that have seen me before, this part may be a little bit of review, but I was told by somebody when I said, should I show this thing again? Somebody of these people may have already seen it. They said, no, show that over and over and over again. And even on the 9th or 10th time when they see this, they will share it with somebody else. How is it supposed to work? Well, our founders, when they created this great nation and they gave us this Constitution, they said, we come from a Judeo-Christian tradition, and we understand that the good book says that all have sinned and fallen short. And you know what? Politicians aren't exempted from that truth. And so, and by the way, I used to have students that would challenge me on that. Oh, no, we're born good. And at the very least, we're born with a clean slate, and and everything you are is a social construct between the ages of 4 and 9, et cetera, et cetera. And so over the years, I would have my class ask that question: are we born good or born bad? And 15 years ago, 80-90% would say we're born bad, because they would understand that. More recently, though, 80 or 90% would say, no, we're all born good, or at least with a clean slate. And I would generally see, often it was a young woman sitting on the side, secretly saying, no, we're born bad. And I would ask her, well, it's okay, be brave, I'll stand here to support you, I'll back you up. Why do you think we're all born bad? She says, well, I know we were, I have children, and let me tell you, they weren't born good. And for those of us that have kids, we've seen that. And you can demonstrate that. Pretend this is a rattle. Give a rattle to a little child. And you have to play with it. Now introduce a second child. The second child crawls over and says, can I partake in your rattle playing? Does the first child say, oh, yes, we were born good. Let me share this with you. We'll play so happily together. No, it doesn't happen, does it? The first child says, no, it's mine. You all just said, no, it's mine. You know what? I've done that scenario, not necessarily with a rattle, but all over the world, in cultures all over the world, at almost every continent. And I've done that little scenario, and sometimes we use the word keys, or sometimes I use what was ever culturally significant for little children. Every mother in the audience say, it's mine. This isn't a cultural social concept. This is a self-evident truth. We're born bad. Our founders understood that. And so the first thing they did was they divided power. They divided the power of this nation, and this power cord is going to represent the exercise of power. They say, we're not going to give it all to one branch because we know that all have sinned and fallen short. And those little babies that play with the rattle when they are little, they grow up and they exercise power in buildings like these when they're adults. So we're going to separate that power. And we're going to limit it very much much so. And we're going to say, if you're going to exercise power, you first have to plug into a power source. And so we're going to list a few plugs for each one of these branches of government. And if you want to use power, you've got to plug into a power source. Congress has the power to plug into the commerce power among the states. Congress has the power to plug into the post power. The reason that your mail gets delivered is because Congress has the power of the post. The President's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. That's why he can send military forces overseas. But only because they have a power source that they can plug into first. Now, even the way it's supposed to work, and the way our founders brilliantly put it together, they said, you know, even if you have a power source, there are some self-evident truths, some liberties that are so very important that even if you are exercising power that you've been authorized to exercise, if you interfere with those liberties, we're going to strike that power down. If you, for example, use your power to interfere with the right of religious conscience, or the right of freedom of speech, or the right to petition the government, or the right of due process, or the right to defend yourself, we are going to look at that law so closely, and we're going to hold it to the highest standard under the law, and if you don't meet that higher standard, we're going to strike it down. Why? Because you are using your power to interfere with one of our fundamental rights. That's the way it's supposed to work. And for many years, it did. And so if government used its power to interfere with your religious conscience, even if they had a constitutional power source properly plugged into, the law would be struck down. Let me give you an example. The Affordable Care Act, now embraced by both sides, I suppose, as Obamacare. They, being Congress, had to have a constitutional power source before they could make that law, correct? Otherwise, they wouldn't be acting within their constitutional authority. So they said, well, medical care, it's not the postal power. What can we use? How about commerce, they said. You know, it must be commerce power. We can regulate commerce among the states, so the medical profession, that must be, and so they passed the Obamacare under using their commerce power. Well, that exercise of power was challenged by the Supreme Court, and I don't know how many of you young people saw this, but did you know the Supreme Court struck down and said Obamacare was unconstitutional? They said it is a violation of commerce power, it is not within the scope of the Congress. If you didn't, don't be surprised, because it was on page 46 of the New York Times, in very, very fine print at the bottom. And the reason you didn't hear about it is because the story they did write about is they said, well, you know what? The president, if he's not anything, he's smart enough to have a good lawyer, and good lawyers always have a backup argument. And so the backup argument that the president's lawyer, when they argued the case was, they said, you know what? If it's not the commerce power, you know what it really is? It's a tax, because in the Constitution, the Congress has the power to tax. Now let's not say that very loud, because it would be the largest tax ever imposed on the American people. And so when that went to the Supreme Court, the majority of the court said, yep, IRS can fine you even, you know, it's handled through the IRS, it looks like a tax, it smells like a tax, and just like a duck, it swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's a tax. So guess what? Congress had the power to pass the Affordable Care Act. Obamacare. Now remember what I said though, even if you have an appropriate power source, and you are exercising that power in a way that is interfering with one of our fundamental rights, what does the court do? The court looks at it very closely, right? Because they're using the power that we've delegated to them in the Constitution in a way that's interfering with our rights. So what the Supreme Court does is they pull out of the closet a very special Supreme Court microscope. And they take that microscope and they put the law that's interfering with one of your fundamental rights, one of your inalienable rights, and they put it under the Constitution. Or I'm sorry, they put it under the Constitution, but they put it under the constitutional microscope. And they look at it very closely. And if that law that is interfering with your unveiling of a right cannot meet that very highest standard of law in the American constitutional legal system, the law gets struck down. So let me tell you what happened. One of those agencies over there that I've been telling you about, that doesn't exist in our Constitution, but yet has the power to impact lives, impacted one of the lives of one of our clients. For example, we represent a business in Florida, a very large business, very important to the infrastructure of the United States. His business provides electricity and helps support the grid. Well, guess what? His one mistake. He was a Christian. And he says, you know what? When I run my business, I will not participate and assist in abortions of the people that work for me. And so the previous administration came in and threatened him to fine millions of dollars, literally millions of dollars, to put him on business. We represent him right now. We've got an injunction by the court. And I was in Washington a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago at this point, and I was in a room with, the Attorney General Sessions, and we can talk about his good and bad parts. But right now, I want you to write a letter to him for me, because he promised and assured everybody on national television that we were going to settle all those suits. And guess what? Many of the suits were settled, but they weren't settled in any way that would protect businesses in the future from a different administration. And so our guy says, no, I want this clear that nobody's going to be able to come back and be able to use the power of government to find my business out of existence unless I participate in abortions with my company. So I said, man, if you're willing to stand up and have that kind of conscience and that kind of, determination to stand up for truth, we're here for you. We're going to represent you for free. Right now, and again, this is one of the best administrations we've had to work with in years, decades, or well over a decade now. We still haven't gotten the administrative deep state to agree that what they are doing is interfering with the First Amendment's right of religious conscience, not to mention statutory rights of we have statutory rights that protect religious conscience as well. Wow. How can somebody that's unelected in the Supreme Court, an agency over here that's unelected, have so much influence and cause so much misery to conservatives in this nation? Well, it's because for so long we let it happen. But I'm happy to report that as I speak around the country now, this is not happening anymore. We are standing up, we're speaking truth, we're doing it in a respectful way, but we're not backing down. And that is my challenge to you guys, your young people again. You're going to have professors that are going to treat you fairly, but they're coming from the far left, and in their writing they're trying to undermine everything that you stand for. Or you may run into professors that are worse than that, where they're not only doing that in their writing, but they will punish you someday at your school. I haven't heard too much about that happening at in your particular department that you're in. Other departments at MSU, it's happening right now big time in a very, very bad way. Your job is to be unafraid and to, in a respectful way, engage the culture. But do it in a way that our ideas are just as valid as somebody else's. And that brings me to the next point in our current status of our Constitution. And I'll bring it around in connection with some stuff that's happening in Michigan. How many people have heard about this guy that's going around Michigan looking for every cross he can find that's associated with any government property? And this is kind of like Paul in the Bible went around to city by city looking for Christians to kill. That's what this guy's doing. He's going city by city. He's looking for crosses, and then he finds that he said you or some group like that to sue to try and put these small little townships, bankrupt these townships unless they take the cross off. Happening all over the place. Well, how did that happen? Because they say it violates separation of church state. It violates the Establishment Clause. Now, wait a minute, folks. The First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. It doesn't say Congress shall not allow, or local government shall not allow a cross on a property. It doesn't say that you have to kick baby Jesus off the courthouse steps every Christmas just to make sure that we're not violating the separation of church and state. The word establishment at the time the First Amendment was written means pretty much the same thing it means today. You can't establish a religious government. We can't have Sharia law like Iran. All right? What the court did, though, because they had some folks that said, we'd like to be able to push this idea of Christian ideas to be able to participate in policy. We want that completely out of here. So we want you to change the word establishment to mean endorse. And so right now, the Supreme Court, in the 70s, they came down with a decision. It hasn't been reversed, but it hasn't been used a lot either, that says if you are going to use power government in any way, write a law, make a policy, put a cross on property, any government action has to have a secular purpose. You have to have a secular reason for doing so. You can't even symbolically endorse religion. And so guess what? All these crosses on property, they don't establish Christianity as the government of the United States, requiring that all our legislation be consistent with Christian tenets, does it? So it shouldn't violate the Establishment Clause. But what they're doing, instead of pointing to the Establishment Clause itself, they point to a decision by the Supreme Court that says, well, we're going to change the meaning of that clause to say you have to have a secular purpose. You can't even symbolically endorse religion. And so now guess what? These crosses that are being attacked last week and the week before, now somebody says, well, that at least symbolically endorses Christianity. That's the symbol of Christ. And, at that point, I'm going to share the gospel with them, so maybe we'll save them. So now they're saying we can't do that. We can't do that. Again, an unelected court changing the meaning of the Constitution. Now, what has that got to do with the Supreme Court case that we're working on right now in the Supreme Court? We represented the first time around state legislatures and members of Congress. This time around, we're coming in and, because this is the second time the national security travel ban has been challenged. You can't show that you're safe coming in, that you're not a terrorist, and we did a great big investigation to determine which countries could do that and which countries couldn't, then you don't get to come in if we can't know that you're not a terrorist or not. That's a very short and I think fair summary of the national security travel ban produced by President Trump. That travel ban is being challenged under the same terms of the Constitution as these crosses in Michigan. What they're arguing is that President Trump, during his campaign, made some comments about Muslims. And he said, that shows that you don't have the proper intent. You must have a religious intent. You don't have a secular intent. And you start to scratch your head and say, wow, how do these people come up with these ridiculous arguments? They sound so ridiculous that when my kids were little homeschool kids, people laughed at that. But they get local district trial court judges saying, oh, sounds good to me. Unconstitutional. So now it's in the Supreme Court for the second time. And they argue that the national security travel ban has to be struck down because it violates the religion law. Because it doesn't have a secular purpose. Can you imagine if that judge-made doctrine was in place during the Lincoln administration? The Emancipation Proclamation would be unconstitutional. Why? Because Lincoln invoked the favor of Almighty God, not in the speech when he was running for office, but in the very document itself. Do you see how far we've come? See how far we've come? How much time do I have? 4 minutes. Let me bring this to a close. Because what I want to use, because I had a great evolution of a real bunch of crap that the Supreme Court's done as well in some other areas. But what I want to do now in the last 4 minutes is show you what can be done and what we the people, what we conservatives can do. Remember we talked about power sources? Congress has some power sources that it can use to check the federal judiciary. The first power source that Congress has, we talked about the power to tax. Well, along with power to tax is the power to spend. So after they take our taxes, they go through this appropriations process and they spend that money. Well, a lot of that money goes to pay for all that marble you see right here. And inside that marble, I was there last week, is a whole bunch of mahogany and a whole bunch of really fancy, libraries and computers and highly paid law clerks from the very best schools in the country and support staff. And you know what? What if Congress one day said, federal government, until you start acting within the scope of Article 3, within the scope of your proper authority, and stop doing our job over here and making policy, we're going to defund you. Now, the one thing they can't do is lower the salaries of the judges because the Supreme Court, because the Constitution says you can't lower the salary. But all that other stuff is fair game. And the next thing they can do is Congress controls the jurisdiction and the size of the court. Under the Constitution, the only thing in the Constitution is that the federal judiciary has to be a Supreme Court. It doesn't even say how many members, and we've had different numbers. So if Congress wanted to fully exercise its power tomorrow, the entire federal judiciary could be Chief Justice Roberts at his desk. Think of all those trial courts, those federal trial courts that have, undid the will of 2.7 million people in the marriage case when they said our constitutional amendment was no good. When one judge, one sitting federal judge did that, I would call that, if I was the chairman of the Appropriations Committee or the chairman of the Government Operations Committee, I wouldn't file an indictment for impeachment yet, but I would haul that judge in front of me. And I would ask him where he got that constitutional authority in Article 3 to do what he did. Can you imagine if we had the courage of some members of Congress to hold hearings like that? Just holding the hearing, just scheduling the hearing would be such a shot across the bow of the Supreme Court. Now again, we got to be wise as serpents, and we got to be able to. You can't be reckless when we do so. There is another constitutional power source that Congress has. And I call it the hammer. And this is probably the less politically feasible one. But Congress has the power in the House of Representatives to impeach a federal judge. And in the Senate of the United States, they have the power to remove a federal judge. Now, the Constitution, Article 3, requires these folks in the judiciary to be acting with good behavior. I'm telling you, if you're acting outside the scope of the authority that's been given to you, and you're changing the meaning of the Constitution, and you're imposing policy on millions of dollars, on millions of people involving millions of dollars, and taking that power away from these branches of government, I think that's bad behavior.
Yep.
And in my view, these are people. And I'll finish. Let me step back to the one before that. Because it's probably not politically feasible to tell Congress, even if they have the power to do so, to remove all the federal judges and end the judiciary. But you know what? If they have the power to do that, which they clearly do in the Constitution, the Supreme Court has upheld it, the other thing they have to do is they could strip part of the jurisdiction of the court away. And the Congress has done that on a fair amount of times, and they've done it successfully, and the Supreme Court's even recognized it and actually filed it and acquiesced. And so, for example, let me think of the latest. One of the latest times was when Congress passed a law, how many times you could appeal if you were a prisoner. And the Supreme Court struck it down. Congress then stripped them of the jurisdiction to hear that. The Supreme Court said, well, we can't do it anymore. We can't decide this area of law. Well, how about they start doing it in the area of abortion, religious freedom, and some of these other areas as well, and restore good governance and rule of law in this nation. God bless you guys. Thank you for listening.